Previously on A Love That Lingered, Grace fled the manor after Arthur's desperate claim that she was his wife returned to him. Oliver found her in the garden and, with uncharacteristic vulnerability, admitted he had loved her too in that past life. He begged her to leave before history repeated itself, but offered no answers about the tragedy that had claimed her. This is Episode 7, The Boy in the Garden. The garden was different in the past. The air smelled sweeter, and the roses were young and vibrant, their blooms unmarked by time's weathering touch. It was evening now, and the great house glowed with lamplight spilling from tall windows. The Caldwell estate was alive with the murmured grief of its guests. Black fabric draped the banisters. Servants glided silently along the halls, their faces tight with the etiquette of mourning. Somewhere inside, the sound of a woman's sobbing carried faintly over the muted conversation. Grace, only 15, had slipped away from the stifling air of the drawing room. She had never been one for large gatherings, and this one in particular felt unbearable. The manor was dressed like a tomb. The guests' eyes, rimmed in red, carried too much sorrow for her to hold. She was not here for herself, but for her father's sake, to give condolences to his old friend's family. She wandered until she found herself in the garden, the darkness wrapping her in quiet. She sat on a weathered stone bench tucked between hedges, twisting her handkerchief between her fingers. The summer night was warm, but the atmosphere seemed colder here. A single lantern burned faintly on a post near the path, its light spilling in soft pools across the gravel. Moths fluttered around it like pale, restless thoughts. Inside the manor, life and loss mingled. Out here, there was only stillness, until the sound of hurried footsteps broke it. They were fast, uneven, almost frantic. Whoever it was had not come for a stroll. Grace's heart leapt. She held her breath, hoping the hedge's shadow would be enough to hide her. She had no wish to intrude, and yet curiosity rooted her in place. A figure emerged onto the path, tall for his age, but not yet a man grown. His dark suit was rumpled, as though he had been tugging at it in discomfort. Arthur Caldwell, the boy she had heard of only in passing, son of the deceased, now the heir to all of this. He was 17, and in that moment, he looked utterly undone. Arthur didn't notice her at first. His head was bowed. One hand pressed against his face as if holding something in. The other hand gripped the garden's stone wall so tightly that his knuckles whitened. Grace saw, even in the dim light, that his eyes were rimmed red, not from the polite sort of tears that society allowed, but from the raw grief that broke rules. She thought to slip away, but her dress rustled against the bench. His head snapped up. For an instant, his gaze was sharp, as though he expected an intruder to challenge him. But when he saw her, something in his expression shifted, not softer exactly, but less guarded. "I'm sorry," Grace whispered, rising to her feet. "I didn't mean to—" "You're fine," he interrupted. His voice was hoarse. I thought I was alone." She hesitated. "I can go." Arthur shook his head quickly, almost desperately. "No. Stay, please." There was a silence between them, the kind that teetered between awkwardness and strange familiarity. Grace smoothed her skirt, unsure what to say. She had never been good with condolences. Words always felt too small. Arthur seemed to read this in her. "You don't have to say anything," he said, his voice quieter now. "Everyone inside, they keep talking, as if talking makes it better." Grace thought about that. Maybe it does for them, but not for you? He gave a sad smile. No, not for me. The lantern's glow caught in his pale hair, turning it gold at the edges. She wondered if this was the first time he had been outside since the guests arrived. He looked like someone who had been holding his breath for days. Finally, she said, "Sometimes being quiet is the kinder thing." Arthur studied her, as though trying to decide what kind of person would say that. Then, to her surprise, he sat down on the bench beside her. They didn't speak for a long while. The night insects filled the silence. Somewhere in the garden center, water trickled from a fountain. When Arthur finally spoke, it was almost to himself. He wasn't supposed to die. Grace's throat tightened. She had no answer for that. She only turned her handkerchief over in her hands, wishing she had something better to offer. Arthur leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "Everyone keeps telling me I have to be strong, that I'm the man of the house now. But they don't understand that I'm still just me." Something in Grace stirred at that, not pity, but a deep, unexpected empathy. The boy beside her was a stranger, and yet in this moment she saw him clearly. Not as the heir to an estate, not as the grieving son everyone whispered about, but simply as Arthur, a boy who had lost the person who tethered his world. "You don't have to be what they want," Grace said quietly. "Not right now. Maybe not ever." Arthur turned to her sharply, his eyes searching hers. "Do you really believe that?" "I do." She managed a faint smile. "At least I'd like to." He seemed to weigh her words like they were something rare. Then, almost imperceptibly, the tension in his shoulders eased. They stayed in the garden until the sound of a servant calling for him drifted through the hedges. Arthur rose reluctantly. "I should go." Grace nodded. He hesitated, then said, "What's your name?" "Grace Everly." Arthur took a step backward toward the path, the lamplight pooling between them. "Grace," he repeated, as if testing the weight of it. "Thank you." Then he was gone, swallowed by the darkness of the path leading back to the house. Grace remained on the bench a moment longer, listening to the faint sounds of the wake. She didn't know it yet, but that night had marked the first thread in a tapestry neither of them could escape. The moon rose higher over the Caldwell garden, casting silver light on the roses, young, unscarred, and unaware of the frost that would one day claim them.